What are we to do? The undead cannot be allowed to hold Falasnagobel. We must send for aid. Perhaps Torkalora can offer assistance. A rider then, swift as... Look to the sky! The Lindworm, Rosgravel! Aenir, Arastir, you look as if you have seen battle. Yet you are far from the incursion at Banethfaur. The undead landed as we gathered at Falasnagobel, Honoured Rider. They forced us from the shore. A second incursion. Ill news. Rosgravel and I shall assist in removing the dead before we continue to Banethfaur. Lavandus' pride and a war machine from Ithilianu approach along the forest path. Will we have the strength required? I fear not. Our casualties were high. Arastir, can you rouse the ancestor spirits inhabiting these woods? With your permission, Honoured Rider. You have it. Oh, and that's the last of the skeletons reanimated. I wouldn't have thought it possible to tire, but my animating magic seemed sluggish, strained. You know, seeing the she-elves and their young, I thought I would feel something, but I find myself unmoved. Perhaps Incorporix is right. Perhaps I am making things more complicated than they need be. Oh drat, something emerges from the trees. It's well past time to get the captives loaded on the boats. They're taking captives. We must see them freed. If you have a chance to kill the necromancer, his puppet should fall. Having reconstituted his forces, surprisingly enough, everything survived the carnage of the last battle, gathered the wounded Elven soldiers and captured the civilians too slow to flee, Gideon now has to drive them back to his boats, while the Elven forces will be trying to save them. The captives are reluctant to move and will require a unit in contact with them to spend an action to force them forward 3 inches. Once moved, they count as activated and cannot be moved again this turn. Oh gods, it's an escort quest. The Elves can rescue captives by moving into contact with the unit and fighting a round of combat. For each hit scored, a captive's bonds are cut and they are rescued. The Elves cannot shoot the captives. If the undead can move them to the shore, 18 inches or 6 moves away, with 10 or more captives left, they will be victorious. If the Elves can prevent the captives from reaching the shore, or rescue more than half of them, the Elves will claim victory. Arastir the spellcaster takes the initiative on the first turn, keen for a rematch, and with targets in range, he casts True Flight on the Ithilianu Greatbow,
Incantare Tila,
enchanting its projectiles to deadly effect. Maintaining his connection to the weave, hands circling the contained powers, he turns to spy the archers on the right flank. The Bleakrise Barrow Guard, deployed forward to shepherd the captives, begin to drive their charge to the shore, spear points encouraging the reluctant prisoners. With their spear-sized darts and sorcelled, the crew of the Ithilianu Greatbow take aim at the mass of skeletons before them. Tugging the release, the Greatbow limbs snap forward and the dart streaks across the field, crashing through the ranks of the Wormreach spears like a rolling ball through standing pins. 6 skeletons are shattered, either by the passing bolt or the Wormreach shrapnel created in its wake. Safely tucked within the corpse guard, Gideon Hex infuses the weapons of the Wickwood soldiers with thick black ichor, poisoning their blades. Consolidated from the survivors of the last battle, the Falasnagobel archers loose a volley at the Bleakrise Barrow Guard as they emerge from the woods. Their arrows slice through the air, battering the skeletons from behind and causing one of them to crumple to pieces.
a good start.
Following up on their arrows' flight, the archers move up into the woods ahead of them. Advancing forward to guard the captives, the Wormreach spears move up along the flank of the Bleakrise Barrow Guard. The spirits of the forest, reawoken elven shades inhabiting the forest trees, surge forward, answering the call of their long-lived peers and descendants. The Crimson Remnant wheel and advance to protect the Bleakrise Barrowguard's other flank. Lirin and Roscravel soar over the woods, landing lightly on the other side to survey the ranks of the dead before them. The Wickerwood soldiers, led by the Wickerwood champion, advance forward into the woods, holding the undead right flank. Aenir of the Hallinor trots his mount Doolan forward, seeking to exploit gaps in the undead line. The Ancien Marauders hurriedly finish forming up, their members having scattered to capture the prisoners, before slowly marching forward. Lavandis leads her pride of hunting lynx, moving forward in an arc, aiming to exploit the thin undead centre. Turn 1 ends, both sides advancing, the elves to break the undead lines, the undead to hold the elves back while escorting their captives. Big damage from the elves off the bat, blasting apart the spear skeletons with arrow and dart, and the undead being able to do little more than weather the storm as best they can.
Please, help us!
You monsters!
Initiative on turn 2 is won by the undead, and the Bleakrise Barrowguard continue to drive the captives forward, ignoring all else as they are focused on their primary objective. The captives are slowly moved closer to the coast.
Please, they got the children!
Focused on rescuing the prisoners, Aenir of the Hallinor pivots as the Barrowguard march forward, spurring Doolan to charge into their exposed rear. As his mount reaches a gallop, he slams into the skeletal lines, longsword sweeping along Doolan's flank in a blur of steel as the steed bowls skeletons over with flashing hooves and crushing bulk. 3 skeletons fall to Aenir's charge, their spears in no position to temper his assault, and pulling about to charge again, he fells a further foe with a warding cut as he extricates himself from their ranks. Slowed by the massive branches and brush, the Wickerwood soldiers wheel into position to countercharge any elves held by the Wormreach spears. The dancing blade in the Wickerwood champion's skeletal hands coming alive in anticipation of clashes to come. Hurtling forward, the spirits of the forest crash into the front of the Crimson Remnant, branch-like limbs rending and tearing through dilapidated shields and rusted armour, and scattering 4 skeletons across the earth and path. The maces and swords of the skeletons prove little use against the wooden bodies of the forest revenants, but the axes bite deep, chips flying as 3 of the attacking branch wraiths are hacked to pieces, their animating spirits rising skyward with a ghostly moan. With both sides heedless of their well-being, a further skeleton and elven revenant fall before the Crimson Remnant are forced back to regroup at the base of the tower, displacing the Ancien Marauders.
Stand your ground, wretches.
Gideon Hex finds himself flustered and his concentration wanes after reanimating the majority of his force a short time ago.
Here too long.
Unable to grasp the weave, he shifts his bodyguard sideways to change his perspective of the battle. Pivoting, Lirin and Roscravel leap into the air, gliding forward to assault the front ranks of the Wormreach spears. Presented with a hedge of spear points, Roscravel keeps her distance, snapping out with teeth and wickedly barbed tail, as Lirin's long spear lances down into the packed ranks. Together they destroy 6 of the skeletons, breaking their formation apart and then crashing to the ground amid their ranks. A spear carves a furrow down Roscravel's neck as she lands, but 3 more skeletons are crushed beneath her bulk, and the remains are forced to regroup in the distance, Roscravel bellowing a challenge to all who can hear, which admittedly is probably not many. The Ancien Marauders find themselves hemmed in, front and sides, indecision robbing them of the opportunity to clear the Crimson Guard in front of them. With the Bleakrise Barrowguard compromised, they shift sideways to assume shepherdship of the captives. With the undead centre thinning, Lavandis leads her pride forward to exploit the inevitable collapse. The crew of the Athelianu Greatbow finish reloading and, spotting the movement of the Wickerwood soldiers in the woods, take aim low among the branches. The enchanted dart punches forward, shearing through low-hanging branches and bracken to devastate the ranks of the Wickerwood skeletons. 4 are pulverised by the whistling dart and scattered among the undergrowth. Still twisting on strands of the weave, Adastir releases the magics towards the Falasnagobel archers, shaping the energies with gesture and word, and enchanting the arrows in the bow elves' quivers. With his enchantment spells in place, he moves into the woods to look for targets to strike from afar. With their arrows newly enchanted, the Falasnagobel archers loose, strings singing as their shafts flash through the gap between structure and spirit, slashing through the ranks of the Crimson Remnant. Their waterlogged shields burst under the impact as ensorcelled broadheads carve through rusted mail and rotting quilt. Two of the skeletons are broken under the battering assault as the archers continue to move closer to the fray. That's turn 2, and the Elven missiles and melee are ripping apart the skeletal lines and taking a very dominant position on the field. The undead heavy hitters have been caught out of position, but if they can keep those captives moving, their losses will all be worth it. Crush them, Rosgravel! Initiative on turn 3 goes to the Elves, and Lurin and Rosgravel continue their assault, charging across the ground to slam into the depleted ranks of the Wormreach spears, their once formidable hedge, now a few scattered thorns. With snapping maw and striking tail, Rosgravel demolishes 4 of the spear skeletons in an instant, their spears unable to pierce the lindworm's hide. The final skeletons felled by Lurin with a spear thrust from above, its uncaring nature leaving it wide open to the piercing strike. With their foes destroyed, Ryder and Worm survey the field before them. The Bleakrise Barrow Guard belatedly react to the threat behind them, their animating logics conflicting with their charge of the captives. In a confused jumble, they rearrange their ranks to about face, fronting up to the threats behind them. The spirits of the forest follow up on the flashing volley of arrows, slamming into the depleted ranks of the Crimson Remnant. Tree-like limbs slash and spear, ripping the skeletal soldiers to pieces, their dilapidated armour no match for the roused wrath of the ancestor spirits. 7 skeletons fall to their initial assault, a single revenant being hewn in return. And despite their losses, both sides stand and continue to trade blows. 3 more skeletons are ripped apart before Gideon can assert direct control and pull the rest back out of the reach of the Elven revenants. With the front line sundered and the captives now in their charge, the Ancien marauders drag them towards the waiting boats, before the officer splits off a detachment.
You 5.
5 line breakers who will continue to shepherd the captives, while the main force will move up to engage the enemy. Cranking back the limbs of their ballista once more, the crew of the Athilianu Greatbow load and release another heavy dart towards the Wickerwood soldiers lurking in the woods. It strikes true, shearing another 4 skeletons apart, carpeting the tranquil woodland with shards of bone and twisted bronze. With Lurin and Rosgravel blasting through the undead front line, the Wickerwood soldiers find their trap vacant and are forced to wheel about through the woods, wasting another turn in the rough terrain as they track their target, but are unable to engage. The Falasnagobel archers pause in their advance to release their next volley at the Bleakrise Barrow Guard. Pounded by the accurate rain of enchanted arrows, bone chips fly as 2 skeletons crumple beneath the onslaught, and the archers continue their advance. As the front line disintegrates in front of him, Gideon Hex gathers the weave, seeking to bolster what areas he can. With his spell-focused trait, he casts Reanimate on the Wickerwood soldiers, pouring power into their fallen remains. But despite the energy expended, only a single skeleton rises from the undergrowth, the other bones too scattered to rebuild all at once. Withered arms shaking from the effort, his sight shifts to the lindworm standing proud among the wreckage of the Wormreach spears. Their gazes lock, and Gideon swiftly scrambles backward, seeking distance between himself and the mighty beast. Adastir turns about in the woods, and seeing the Wickerwood soldiers shifting about in the trees, continues to pluck at the strands of the weave, launching a fireball to sear through the woods and burst among the skeletons. 2 are destroyed in the explosion, their remains smoking on the forest floor. Spurring Doolan, Aenir crashes back into the Bleak-Rise Barrow Guard, longsword and helm flashing in the sun. Cleaving about with fell effect, 4 of the skeletons are hewn from unlife, with skulls split and limbs shorn. They crumple to the ground in pieces. Dancing among their spear shafts, Aenir and Doolan weave and twist, the spear skeleton's feeble strikes unable to breach the cavalry elf's defences, and 2 more of the dead fall as Elf and Steve withdraw, making room to charge again. Not believing her luck, Lavandis pivots her pride about as the skeletal soldiers emerge from the trees just ahead. Bounding forward, they eagerly pounce on the skeleton's flank, driving them to the ground where their bones are snapped by the swipes of powerful paws and crushing jaws. 4 are brought down before the champion emerges from their ranks. Deadly skill further enhanced by the gracefully balanced sword clutched in his fleshless grip, the Wickerwood champion unleashes his signature blade storm on the unaware hunting pride. The gleaming blade at stark contrast to his darkened visage, he cleaves a swath through his feline foes, leaving 5 broken on his formation's flank, and a further succumbing to the toxins oozing off his weapon. Lavandis herself strikes down 2 of the skeletons with precise thrusts of her spear, before she and the rest of the pride fall back in disorder, panicked by the brutality of the champion's assault. That ends turn 3, and the Undead centre has been obliterated. The Elves punching a massive hole through their front line, while the Undead heavy hitters are still caught out of position. The captives are halfway to shore, and if the Undead can keep them moving, they can still achieve their objective, but the Elves are in a great position to stop them. Initiative on turn 4 goes to the Undead, and answering Gideon's call, the Wickerwood champion leads his remaining soldiers in a charge at the Lindworm, Rosgravel. Focused on the Necromancer ahead of them, Lirin and Rosgravel are taken unawares, and the Wickerwood champion's dancing blade bites deep into Rosgravel's hide. Dark blood splattering the earth as the champion carves broad slashes into the Lindworm's tail and wings. Bellowing in pain, Rosgravel shies away from the skeletons, her sudden movements forcing Lirin to concentrate on maintaining his seat, and by the time they've recovered enough to strike back, the Wickerwood skeletons have backed off out of reach.
I know that blade. It does not belong to you.
The Falasnagobel archers knock arrows and release another volley at the dwindling Bleak-Rise Barrow Guard. Their enchanted arrows, focused on just the 2 figures, batter the skeletons, blasting off chunks of bone and collapsing the undead upon themselves. Celebrating their success, the elves wheel to the edge of the woods. The marauder detachment shepherds the captives onwards to shore, keeping pace with them to encourage their continued march. With the way now clear, Aenir of the Hallinor leaps forward on Doolan,
Save us!
rushing to the rear of the captives, where, leaning from the saddle, he lashes out at the bindings of prisoners,
to the forest.
cutting 3 of them free to flee to safety.
Thank you, hero.
Aware that he's in the thick of it, he wheels Doolan about, keeping an eye out for trouble, before he moves back to free more. With Gideon's focus elsewhere, the remaining Crimson Remnants surge back at the spirits of the forest, impaling themselves on the reaching branches of the Elf Revenants, who tear them apart before they can chop the Revenants' sylvan forms. Wary of striking Rosgravel, the crew of the Athelianu Greatbow shift their focus to the Ancien Marauders at the very edge of their range. Aiming high, they release their dart in an arc to fall among the Revenants, the enchanted missile flying true to spear 4 of the desiccated dead, bursting them apart and shredding their mummified remains.
And again, reset it.
As they redress their lines, the single Revenant in the back rank of the Ancien Marauders steps away from the unit, entrusted with a mission of its own.
Kill him.
And the remaining marauders charge forward at the spirits of the forest.
Hack them apart.
Their wicked two-handed axes slam forth, rending branch from stem and splitting trunk and root. 4 branch wraiths fall to the hacking and chopping, and overwhelmed by a roar and primal fear of these fierce weapons. 2 further are toppled as the rest flee before them, rushing back in the direction of the familiar shelter of the woods. Alistair's keen eyes spot the lone revenant split off from their main body, and suspecting some trickery afoot, he utters words of power, launching a fireball towards the single creature. It streaks across the battlefield to detonate just before its target, the blast throwing the revenant from its feet. But reaching for its axe, the marauder clambers upright again, steam rising in a mist from its damp clothing. Disappointed, Alistair moves up through the woods. As things fall apart and an enormous lindworm fills his vision, Gideon panics and urges his corpse guard to the left, circling around towards the relative safety of the boats. With the Wickerwood champion occupied elsewhere and the surprise of his assault wearing off, Lavandus' pride settle down and wheel forward, lining up behind the skeletal soldiers. And so ends turn 4. The Undead centre remains wide open, and 3 units of skeletons have been utterly destroyed. But the remaining Undead have shifted the tide somewhat, dealing brutal damage to the Elven Revenants and Lindworm. But is it too late?
Stop him! I need those prisoners!
Initiative on turn 5 goes once more to the Undead, the Wickerwood champion surging back at Liren and Rosgravel, who, in the process of launching into the air towards Gideon, are caught from behind once more. And it's not just because I forgot about the whole free pivot thing. Again. They react quickly though, fending off most of the skeleton champion's swings. Though one cleaving slash rips a great tear in the delicate membrane of Rosgravel's left wing.
This is getting tiresome.
As Liren keeps the champion's attention with probing thrusts of his long spear, Rosgravel snaps at the lesser skeletons, her crushing jaws crumpling 2 in one mighty bite.
Come, Rosgravel.
With a call from Liren, Rosgravel turns, smashing a further skeleton with her striking tail as her forearms punch the ground, building speed to take to the air.
We have more important targets.
With time for more daring rescues, Aenir sweeps back at the captives,
Help us.
leaning forward in his saddle to sever the bonds of another 3 prisoners, and perhaps more importantly, preventing the Undead from driving them on for a moment.
Fly now, swiftly.
As the freed captives flee for safety, he circles about, watching for dangers once more. With the extraction of the captives threatened, the Ancien marauders wheel about, rushing the lone cavalry elf from behind, great axes poised to strike. Aenir fights valiantly, longsword singing through the air, plunging through the holes in the Revenant's cuirasses as Doolin's hooves pulverise withered flesh. 3 Revenants fall, 1 uncaring as its head is severed, but the marauders are many and their axes bite deep. Doolin cries in pain as the noble steed is brought low, and thrown to crash heavily to the ground, Aenir is trapped under his fallen mount's bulk, groaning softly in a barely conscious daze. As Aenir disappears from sight, the Athelianu greatbow launches another dart towards the mass of Revenant warriors gathered around him. The spear-like arrow punches fist-sized holes through the concentrated line breakers, blowing another 4 Undead from their feet to crumple to the ground, ruined. Calming himself as best he can and desperate to hold the line, Gideon manages to gather enough strands of the weave to reanimate 1 of the broken Wickerwood soldiers, necromantic energies binding the broken bones to rise again.
Keep your distance from that.
Self-preservation still foremost in his mind though, he shifts his bodyguard closer to the boats and further from the wounded Lindworm. The Falasnagobel archers send another volley of arrows across the field,
Loose.
this time seeking the Wickerwood soldiers. The shafts punch and smash the skeletons, pummeling the freshly reanimated soldier back into pieces.
Oh, come on. I just raised him.
The archers then rush out of the woods, moving forward to take position closer to the action.
Keep the pressure on.
Turning on the spot, the lone marauder faces along the back of the captives, standing a moment to assess his options. His original orders were to take out the cavalry elf, but with that problem solved, he looks to the marauder officer for instruction, then moves forward, looking to cut off the wounded lindworm, heedless of the odds. Stalking forward, Lavandis and her pride lunge at the Wickwood soldiers from behind, bowling them from their feet and tearing them apart with tooth and claw. Blind to the stealthy beasts, his attention forward, the dancing sword nevertheless comes alive in the Wickwood champion's hands. It sweeps behind him, cutting down one, then two of the attacking felines, before the champion himself is overwhelmed and brought down, the sword twisted from his skeletal grasp, locked between the ribs of a dying lynx. The marauder detachment struggle to keep the captives in line after Aenir's rescue attempts, barely managing to keep order and shifting into a position to drag the captives if need be. Adastir slings another fireball from the woods, his manipulations of the magical weave are masterful, and the glowing orb streaks across the battlefield to detonate among the marauder detachment, scattering Run of the Revenants across the shoreline. The spirits of the forest, still wary of the axes of the marauders, wheel and move up behind them, their enduring hatred of the weapons overcoming their deep-rooted terror. For now. That's the end of turn 5, and the Undead are looking incredibly thin on the ground. If they can move the captives twice more, they can pull this out, but they are running out of tools to get it done.
Help us!
Keep moving, bloodbags.
You brutes!
Initiative on turn 6 goes to the Undead yet again. I think that's the only thing keeping them in this fight. The lone marauder turns towards Lirin and Rosgravel, and without the need to summon any form of courage, dashes towards the flank of the lindworm, axe winding for a hammer blow to the creature's ribs.
My name will be eternal.
But Lirin's spear lances out, checking the revenant's advance, and twisting from her skyward jump, Rosgravel snaps the marauder in her jaws. Shaking violently, she tears the revenant in half.
Your minions dwindle.
But it has kept her busy.
Necromancer.
As the spirits of the forest prepare to fall upon the Ansem marauders, the axe terror rises up anew. It consumes them, filling them root to sprig, and they wheel backwards to escape, unwilling to face those splitting and hewing blades. Dashing forward, the remaining Ansem marauders brandish their great axes and bellow breathless shouts at the huddled captives, shoving them on towards the waiting boats.
Oh!
The Falasnagobel archers knock arrows and loose into the rear of the marauders,
Shatter
who
them.
herd their family and friends towards an unknown fate. Their skill unmatched, their enchanted arrows puncture time-worn bronze and withered flesh, banishing the enchanting magics animating 2 of the remaining revenants. Their charges almost home, the marauder detachment wheel around behind the captives and move forward to both press them on and guard them from rescue.
Your fate is sealed.
Adastir weaves together another fireball, but finds the magics around him sparse, and they dissipate before he can make use of them. With the pressure on and the situation desperate, Gideon makes a decision. He can exist, fearfully clinging to his old life and riding the currents of fate. Or he can embrace his new nature and commit himself fully to the Corpse King. In that moment, he decides to be part of something greater, something terrible, and his fear is overthrown by an enduring and relentless resolve. The king wants these captives, and Gideon will see it done. Wheeling his corpse guard around, he marches them sideways, getting himself into a position to either drive the captives to the boat personally or block the elves' advance using his own fragile body. Thou willa, mine king. Lavandis wheels her pride about, desperately leading them up the centre towards the abducted elves, and the crew of the Athelianu Greatbow shift their machine, manhandling it forward as the battle has moved beyond their range. That brings us to initiative on turn 7, which is taken by the Elves. Lirin and Rosgravel, now freed from further distractions, turn their eyes forward. They can either strike the detachment shoving the captives onwards, or hit the robed figure standing before them. Adasteir's words echo in Lirin's mind. Kill the necromancer, and his puppets will fall.
Forward, Rosgravel!
Rosgravel surges forward, knuckles slam into the earth in powerful bounds, deep crimson blood flying from ragged wounds in her wings and tail, to slam into the waiting corpse guard like a battering ram. Swinging her massive wedge-shaped head up as she lands, she pummels Gideon, throwing him backwards in an arc to the spine-chilling crack of splintering bone. His limp body bouncing off the hull of the boat behind him in a rattle of loose bones, before sinking beneath the waves, a loose grey cloak swirling in the surf. And Rosgravel rampages through the corpse guard, rending the ghouls to nothing with tooth and claw, Lirin defending her sides with his biting spear, until none stand before them. But unfortunately for the Elves, it is too late. Lirin and Rosgravel were damned with either choice, and Gideon's distraction buys enough time for the Marauder detachment to drive the captives to their goal, the Revenants animated by more than just Gideon's will alone. And so victory, by the barest of margins, goes to the Undead.
Help us!
Too late! Can you not fly out and save them, honoured rider? Rosgravel is too wounded to fly over water, and she would tip the bound captives into the ocean to drown should she land on one of their vessels. I thought you said taking out the necromancer would stop them. It should have. The lesser dead at least. Could this be more than just an opportunistic raid? Time will tell. I must see to Rosgravel and make haste along the coast. You must do 3 things for me. Send a rider to the Admiralty in Torquallora and have them dispatch swan ships to track down the captives. Recover the elven sword that skeleton bore. And once he has been seen to, have Aenir carry it to my officers in Torquallora, where he shall await me. Oh, and throw their remains to the tides. These lands should not bear their taint.